One important reason why I believe that this is the time of the end, and that it began in the year 1914, and that's really the end of the Gentile Times. It was really 607 BCE, the beginning of the Gentile Times. You count 70 years from about 536, 537. When Cyrus the Persian gave the decree and destroyed Babylon and all that. Go back 70 years when Jerusalem and Judah was destroyed. Okay, go back in time, it's 607. Go by biblical chronology, not ever changing or doubtful or not very solid secular chronology. Anti-witnesses, pagans, secularists, and apostates will twist the 70-year prophecy of, quote, devastation or ruins to, quote, actually mean something else. Claim it either, quote, actually means mere servitude to the king of Babylon for 70 years, or instead claim it, quote, actually means some sort of vague or figurative type of devastation for 70 years. They go to great lengths to argue that how long the city of Jerusalem lay in ruins is irrelevant. This is despite the scriptures ever so clearly stating that Jerusalem will be in ruins without an inhabitant. True witnesses of the Lord will go by the inspired, proven, infallible, and vindicated written word of God over and above ever flaky, ever shaky secular historians, fallible pagans, and Bible rejectors every time, regardless of clubs or scholars' unions or popularity or whatever. The Bible indicates a 607 BC date for the destruction of Jerusalem by pagan Babylon. So true servants of the Most High and Christ will go by that with no qualms. But also the question begs to be answered from a biblical standpoint. Did the 7 times begin in 607 and end in 1914? Did the 7 times, quote unquote, begin when the ruler on Jehovah's throne in Jerusalem, Zedekiah, was cut down in 607 and end in 1914 with the rightful ruler, Jesus, the twig of Jesse, becoming the king in God's kingdom in heaven? Revelation 12:6, Revelation 12:14 indicate what the times, half a time, and all that. 1260, so 7 times would be 2,520 days, and that's a day for a year rule. We deduct that 7 times, 7 times equals 2,520 years. So amazing as it may seem, it is 2,520 years from 607 BCE to 1914 CE, or AD. Now, are the 7 times of Daniel chapter 4 to be applied in connection with the Gentile times and God's rulership? Yes, because look more into it. The Hebrew word Idan, I-D-D-A-N, is not what would be used merely to describe 1 year if 1 year was what was meant. There's a different word used to describe the word year. For example, the word for year in Hebrew is shana. By using the word Idan, it becomes evident that Daniel wanted to convey the thought that something was meant beyond a simple 7 years. Otherwise, why not just use the word for years? So, there's more to it, but those 7 times obviously is way beyond just 7 years, and not just applying to Nebuchadnezzar when more carefully analyzed. So read Ezekiel chapter 21, verses 25 to 27, and you'll see the point there. But again, the most biblical and most accurate date for the destruction of Jerusalem, after careful analysis, is 607 BCE. But whatever. Whether you go by 586 or 587 or 607, okay, that's a 20-year difference. It would be either 1914 or 1934. Either way, we're living in the last days. If you started at 1914, 2,520 years from 607 BCE lands you in 1914. 2,520 years from 586 BC lands you in 1934. So either way, we would be living in the time of the end, however you want to start it, 1914 or 1934. I go by 1914 because I believe 607 is the correct year when Jerusalem was actually destroyed and the captivity just started and all that. Because Cyrus in 536, around there, liberated the Israelites and brought them back, and the rebuilding of the temple and etc. Okay, but here's the point about world war that people gloss over or don't think about because they're into their own lives or dealing with other things. An important point that is amazing when you stop and honestly and humbly think about it and analyze it. World War I took 14 million lives in a 4-year period. 14 million in 4 years. That's more lives than in all the previous 50 wars combined, or even the last 100 wars before that put together. I mean, it was one war, lasted 4 years. I mean, there have been other wars that lasted 10 years, that lasted longer. So World War I was about 4 years long. It took 14 million. That's more people dying than in the previous 50 or 60 wars. Think about that. Don't just fluff it off as no big deal or whatever. Don't gloss over that. Stop and think about that for a moment. Something was different. It was actually, and believe it or not, it was in World War I where the first use of the machine gun was introduced. It was amazing. I mean, so many people, the carnage. Unprecedented. There was never such a thing as a world war, number one, but also 14 million human beings gone. Men, women, and children, but mostly men, soldiers and things like that, in just 4 years, in one war. Something like that never happened in all of human history. Last 50 wars before 1914, prior to that, just in general, wars that occurred on Earth, in the world. You add them together and they don't come up to 14 million people getting killed. So, obviously, something is... Something was, was more pronounced starting in 1914. And taking Bible chronology, it's the time of the end. When Christ started ruling the midst of his enemies in the world, it's a mess ever since then.